The Adventure of the Beryl Coronet. "Holmes," said I, as I stood one morning in our bow window looking down on the street, "here's a madman coming along. It seems rather sad that his relatives should allow him to come out alone." My friend rose lazily from his armchair and stood with his hands in his pockets at the side of his dressing gown, looking over my shoulder. It was a bright, crisp February morning, and the snow of the day before still lay deep upon the ground, shimmering brightly in the wintry sun. Down the centre of Baker Street it had been ploughed into a brown, crumbly band by the traffic, but at either side and at the heaped-up edges of the footpaths it still lay as white as when it fell. The grey pavement had been cleaned and scraped, but it was still dangerously slippy, so that there were fewer passengers than usual. Indeed, from the direction of the Metropolitan Station, no one was coming save for a single gentleman whose eccentric conduct had drawn my attention. He was a man about 50, tall, portly, and imposing, with a massive, strongly marked face and a commanding figure. He was dressed in a sombre yet rich style, in black frock coat, shining hat, neat brown gaiters, and a well-cut pearl-grey trousers. Yet his actions were absurd contrast to the dignity of his dress and features, for he was running hard, with the occasional little springs, such as a weary man gives who is a little accustomed to set any tax upon his legs. As he ran, he jerked his hands up and down, waggled his head, and writhed his face into the most extraordinary contortions. "What on earth is the matter with him?" I asked. "He is looking up the numbers of the houses." "I believe that he is coming here," said Holmes, rubbing his hands. "Here?" "Yes, I rather think he is coming to consult me professionally. I think that I recognize the symptoms. Ha! Did I not tell you?" As he spoke, the man, pulling and blowing, rushed at our door and pulled our bell until the whole house resounded with the clanging. A few moments later he was in our room, still puffing and gesticulating, but with so fixed a look of grief and despair in his eyes that our smiles were turned into an instant horror and pity. Hi, Riley. For a while he could not get his words out, but swayed his body and plucked at his hair like no one had been driven to the extreme limits of his reason. Then, suddenly springing to his feet, he beat his head against the wall with such force that we both rushed upon him and tore him to the centre of the room. Sherlock Holmes pushed him down into the easy-chair, and, sitting beside him, patted his head and chatted with him in an easy, soothing tones which he knew so well how to employ. "You have come to me to tell your story, have you not?" he said. "You are fatigued with your haste. Pray wait until you have recovered yourself, and then I shall be most happy to look into any problem which you may submit to me." The man sat for a minute, or more, in heaving chest, fighting against his emotions. Then he passed his handkerchief over his brow, set his lips tight, and turned his face towards us. "You no doubt think me mad," he said. "I see that you have come to some great trouble," responded Holmes. "God knows I have. Trouble which is enough to unseat my reason, so sudden and so terrible it is. Public disgrace I might have faced, although I am a man whose character has never yet borne a stain. Public affliction is also the lot of every man, but the two coming together, and in so frightful a form, have been enough to shake my very soul. Besides, it is not I alone. The very noblest in the land may suffer unless some way be found out of this horrible affair." "Pray compose yourself, sir," said Holmes, "and let me have a clear account of who you are and what it is that has befallen you." "My name," answered our visitor, "is probably familiar to your ears. I'm Alexander Holder, of the banking firm of Holder and Stevenson, of Threadneedle Street." The name was indeed well known to us as belonging to a senior partner in the second largest private banking concern in the City of London. What could have happened, then, to bring one of the foremost citizens of London to this most pitiable pass? We waited, all curiosity, until another effort he braced himself to tell his story. "I feel that time is of value," he said. "That is why I hastened here when the police inspector suggested that I should secure your cooperation. I came to Baker Street by the Underground and hurried from there on foot, for the cabs go slowly through the snow. That is why I am a little out of breath, for I am a man who takes very little exercise. I feel better now, and I will put on facts before you shortly, and yet as clearly as I can. It is, of course, well known to you that a successful banking business as much depends on being able to find your remunerate investments on your funds as upon increasing our connection and the number of our depositors. One of our most lucrative means of laying out money is in the shape of loans, where the security is unimpeachable. We have done a great deal in this direction during the last few years, and there are many noble families to whom we have advanced large sums of money and security upon their pictures, libraries, and plate. Yesterday morning I was seated in my office at the bank when a card was brought to me in one of the clerks. I started when I saw the name, for it was that of none other than, well, perhaps even to you I had better say no more than that it was a name which is a household word all over the earth, one of the highest, noblest, most exalted names in all of England. I was overwhelmed by the honor and attempted, when he entered, to say so, but he plunged at once into business with an air of a man who wishes to hurry quickly through a disagreeable task. "Mr. Holder," he said, "I have been informed that you are in the habit of advancing money." "The firm do so when the security is good," I answered. "It is absolutely essential to me," he said, "that I should have £50,000 at once. I could, of course, borrow so trifling a sum of 10 times that from my friends, but I much prefer to make it a matter of business to carry out that business myself. In my position, you can readily understand that it is unwise to place oneself under obligations." "For how long, may I ask, do you want the sum?" I asked. "Next Monday I have a large sum due to me, and I shall then most certainly repay you what you advance, with whatever interest you think it might be right to charge. But it is very essential to me that the money should be paid all at once." "I should be happy to advance it without further parley from my own private purse," said I, "were it not the strain that would be rather more than it could bear. If, on the other hand, I am to do so in the name of the firm, then in justice to my partners I must insist that, even in your case, a very businesslike precaution should be taken." "I should much prefer to have it so," he said, raising up a square black morocco case which he had laid beside his chair. "You have doubtless heard of the Beryl Coronet?" "One of the most precious possessions of the Empire," said I. "Precisely." He opened the case, and there, embedded in soft, flesh-colored velvet, lay the magnificent piece of jewelry which he had named. "There are 39 enormous barrels," he said, "and the price of the gold casing is incalculable. The lowest estimate would be the worth of the coronet at double the sum which I have asked. I am prepared to leave it with you as my security. I took the precious case in my hands and looked at some perplexity from it and my illustrious client. You doubt its value, he asked. Not at all. I only doubt the propriety of leaving it. You may set your mind at rest about that. I should not dream of doing so were it not absolutely certain that I should be able to, in 4 days, reclaim it. It is a matter of form. Is it sufficiently secured? Ample. You understand, Mr. Holder, that I am giving you strong proof of the confidence which I have in you, founded upon all that I have heard of you. I rely upon you not only to be discreet and to refrain from all gossip upon the matter, but above all, to preserve this coronet with every possible precaution, because I need not say that a great public scandal would be caused if any harm were to befall it. Any injury to it would almost be serious as its complete loss, for there are no barrels in the world that match these, and it would be impossible to replace them. I leave it with you, however, with every confidence, and I shall call for it in person on Monday morning. Seeing that the client was anxious to leave, I said no more, but calling for my cashier, I ordered him to pay over the 50 £100 note, £1,000 notes. When I was alone once more, however, with the precious case lying upon the table in front of me, I could not but think that some misgivings of the immense responsibility which it entailed upon me. There could be no doubt that, as it was a national possession, a horrible scandal would ensue if any misfortune should occur to it. I already regretted having ever consented to take charge of it. However, it was too late to alter the matter now, so I locked it up in my private safe and turned once more to my work. When evening came, I felt that it would be impudent to leave so precious a thing in the office behind me. Bankers' safes have been forced before now, and why should not mine be? If so, how terrible would the position in which I would find myself. I determined, therefore, that for the next few days I would always carry the case backwards and forward with me, so that it might never really be out of my reach. With this intention, I called a cab and drove out to my house in Statham, carrying the jewel with me. I did not breathe freely until I had taken it upstairs and locked it in my bureau of my dressing room. And now a word about my household, Mr. Holmes, for I wish you to thoroughly understand my situation. My groom and my page sleep out of the house, and may be set aside altogether. I have 3 maidservants who have been with me a number of years, and whose absolute reliability is above suspicion. Another, Lucy Parr, my second waiting maid, has only been in my service a few months. She came as an excellent character, however, and has always given me satisfaction. She is a very pretty girl and has attracted admirers on occasionally hunting round the place. That is the only drawback which we have found in her, but we believe her to be a thoroughly good girl in every way. So much for servants. My family itself is so small that it would not take me long to describe it. I am a widower, and I have only one son, Arthur. He has been a disappointment to me, Mr. Holmes, a grievous disappointment. I have no doubt that I have myself to blame. People tell me that I have spoiled him. Very likely I have. When my dear wife died, I felt that he was all that I had to love. I could not bear to see the smile fade even for a moment from his face. I have never denied him a wish. Perhaps it would have been better for both of us had I been sterner, but I meant it for the best. I was naturally given intention that he should succeed me in my business, but he is not of a business turn. He was wild, wayward, and, to speak the truth, I could not trust him with the handling of large sums of money. When he was young, he became a member of an aristocratic club, and there, having charming manners, he was soon the intimate of a number of men whose long purses and expensive habits. He learned to play heavily at cards and to squander money on the turf, until he had again and again to come to me to implore me to give him an advance upon his allowance, that he might settle his debts of honor. He tried more than once to break away from the dangerous company which he was keeping, but each time the influence of his friend, Sir George Burwell, was enough to draw him back again. And I could not wonder that such a man as Sir George Burnwell should gain an influence over him, for he has frequently brought him to my house, and I have found myself that I could hardly resist the fascination of his manner. The older he is than he is of Arthur, a man of the world with his fingertips, one who has been everywhere, seen everything, a brilliant talker, and a man of great personal beauty. Yet, when I think of him in cold blood, far away from the glamour of his presence, I am convinced from his cynical speech and the look which I caught in his eyes that he is one who should be deeply disturbed. So I think, and so, too, thinks my little Mary, who has a woman's quick insight into character. And now there is only she to be described. She is my niece. But when my brother died 5 years ago and left her alone in the world, I adopted her, and have looked upon her ever since as my daughter. She is a sunbeam of my house, sweet, loving, beautiful, a wonderful manager and housekeeper, yet as tender and quiet and gentle as a woman could be. She is my right hand. I do not know what I could do without her. In only one matter has she ever gone against my wishes. Twice my boy has asked her to marry him, for he loves her devotedly, but each time she has refused him. I think that if anyone could have drawn him into the right path, it would have been she, and that his marriage would have changed his whole life. But now, alas, it is too late, forever too late. Now, Mr. Holmes, you know the people who live under my roof, and I shall continue with my miserable story. When we were taking coffee in the drawing-room that night after dinner, I told Arthur and Mary of my experience, and of the precious treasure which we had under our roof, suppressing only the name of the client. Lucy Parr, who had brought in the coffee, had, I am sure, left the room, but I cannot swear that the door was closed. Mary and Arthur were much interested and wished to see the famous coronet, but I thought it better not to disturb it. "Where have you put it?" asked Arthur. "In my own bureau." "Well, I hope to goodness the house won't be burgled during the night," he said. "It is locked up," I answered. "Oh, and any old key will fit that bureau. When I was a youngster I could have opened it myself with the key to the box-room cupboard." He often had a wild way of talking, so that I thought little of what he said. He followed me to my room, however, that night, with a very grave face. "Look here, Dad," he said, with his eyes cast down. "Can you let me have £200?" "No, I cannot," I answered sharply. "I've been far too generous with you in money matters." "You have been very kind," said he, "but I must have the money, or else I can never show my face inside the club again." "And a very good thing, too," I cried. "Yes, but you would not have me leave a dishonored man," he said. "I cannot bear the disgrace. I must raise the money in some way, and if you will not let me have it, then I must try other means." I was very angry, for this was a third demand during this month. You shall not have a farthing from me, I cried, on which he bowed and left the room without another word. When he was gone, I unlocked my bureau and made sure that my treasure was safe, and locked it again. Then I started to go around the house to see that all was secure, a duty which I usually leave to Mary, but which I thought it well to perform myself that night. As I came down the stairs, I saw Mary herself at the side window of the hall, which she closed and fastened as I approached. "Tell me, Dad," she said, looking a little disturbed, "did you give Lucy the maid leave to go out tonight?" "Certainly not." "She came in just now by the back door. I have no doubt that she has only been in the side gate to see someone, but I think it is hardly safe and we should be stopped." "You should speak to her in the morning, and if you prefer it. Are you sure that everything is fastened?" "Quite sure, Dad." "Then good night." I kissed her, and I went up to my bedroom again, and where I was soon asleep. "I am endeavoring to tell you everything, Mr. Holmes, which may have any bearing on the case, but I beg that you will question me upon any point which I did not make clear." "On the contrary, your statement is singularly lucid." I come to a part in my story now which I should have wished to be particularly so. I'm not a very heavy sleeper, and the anxiety in my mind tended, no doubt, to make me even less so than usual. About 2 in the morning, then, I was awakened by some sound in the house. I had ceased ere I was wide awake, but I had left an impression behind as to go to the window that had gently closed somewhere. I lay listening with all my ears. Suddenly, to my horror, there was a distinct sound of footsteps moving softly in the next room. I slipped out of bed, all palpitating with fear, and peeped around the corner of my dressing-room door. "Arthur!" I screamed. "You villain! You thief! How dare you touch that coronet?" The gas was half up, as I had left it, and my unhappy boy, dressed in only a shirt and trousers, was standing beside the light, holding the coronet in his hands. He appeared to be retching at it, bending it with all his strength. At my cry, he dropped it out of his grasp and turned pale as death. I snatched it up and examined it. One of the gold corners, with the 3 of the barrels in it, was missing. "You blackguard!" I shouted, beside myself with rage. "You've destroyed it! You have dishonored me forever! Where are the jewels you've stolen?" "Stolen!" he cried. "Yes, you thief!" I roared, shaking him by the shoulder. "There are none missing. There cannot be any missing," said he. "There are 3 missing, and you know where they are. Must I call you a liar as well as a thief?" "Did I not see you trying to tear off another piece?" "You have called me names enough," said he. "I will not stand for it longer. I shall not say another word about business since you have chosen to insult me. I will leave your house in the morning and make my own way in the world." "You shall leave it in the hands of the police," I cried, half mad with grief and rage. "I shall have this matter probed to the bottom." "You shall learn nothing from me," said he, with a passion such as I should not have thought of his nature. "If you choose to call the police, let the police find what they will." By this time the whole house was astir, for I had raised my voice in my anger. Mary was the first to rush into my room, and at the sight of the coronet and Arthur's face, she read the whole story, and, with a scream, fell down senseless to the ground. I sent the housemaid to the police and put the investigation in their hands at once. When the inspector and the constable entered the house, Arthur, who stood silently with his arms folded, asked me whether it was my intention to charge him with theft. I answered that it ceased to be a private matter, and that it had become a public one, since the ruined coronet was national property. I was determined that the law should have its way in everything. At least, he said, you will not have me arrested at once. It should be to your advantage as well as mine if I might leave the house for 5 minutes. That you may get away, or perhaps that you may conceal what you have stolen. Said I. And then, realizing the dreadful position in which I had been placed, I implored him to remember that not only my honor, but that of one who was far greater than I was at stake, and that he threatened to raise a scandal which would convulse the nation. He might avert it all if he would just but tell what he had done with the 3 missing stones. You may as well face the matter, said I. You have been caught in the act, and no confession could make your guilt less heinous. If you but make such reparation as is in your power by telling us where the barrels are, all shall be forgiven and forgotten. Keep your forgiveness for those who ask for it, he answered, turning away from me with a sneer. I saw that he was too hardened for any words of mine to influence him. There was but one way for it. I called in the inspector and gave him into custody. The search was made at once, not only of his person, but of his room and every portion of the house where he could have possibly concealed the gems. But no trace of them could be found, nor would the wretched boy open his mouth for all our persuasions and our threats. This morning he was removed to a cell, and I, after going through all the police formalities, have hurried round to you to implore you to use your skill in unraveling the matter. The police have openly confessed that they can at present make nothing of it. You may go to any expense which you think necessary. I already offered a reward of £1,000. My God, what shall I do? I have lost my honor, my gems, and my son in one night. Oh, what shall I do? He put a hand on either side of his head and rocked himself to and fro, drowning to himself like a child whose grief was not beyond words. Sherlock Holmes sat for some few minutes with his brows knitted and his eyes fixed upon the fire. Do you receive much company? He asked. None save for my partner with his family, an occasional friend of Arthur's. Sir George Burnwell has been several times lately. No one else, I think. Do you go out much in society? Arthur does. Mary and I stay at home. We neither of us care for it. That is unusual for a young girl. She is quite mature. Besides, she is not so very young. She is 4 and 20. She is of a quiet nature. Besides, she is not so... This matter, from what you say, seems to have been a shock to her also. Terrible. She is even more affected than I. You have neither of you any doubt to your son's guilt. How can we have when I saw him with my own eyes with the coronet in his hands? I hardly consider that to be conclusive proof. Was the remainder of the coronet at all injured? Yes, it was twisted. Do you not think, then, that he might have been trying to straighten it? God bless you. You are doing what you can for him and me. But it is too heavy a task. What he was doing was there at all. If his purpose was innocence, why did he not say so? Precisely. And if he were guilty, why did he not invent a lie? His silence appears to be cut both ways. There are several singular points about this case. What did the police think of the noise which awoke you from your sleep? They consider that might be caused by Arthur's closing his bedroom door. A likely story. As if a man bent on felony would slam his door so that it would wake a household. What did they say, then, of the disappearance of these gems? They're still sounding the planking and probing of the furniture in hope of finding them. Have they thought of looking outside the house? Yes, they've shown extraordinary energy. The whole garden has already been minutely examined. Now, my dear sir, said Holmes, is it not obvious to you now that this matter really strikes very much deeper than you and the police were first inclined to think? It appeared to you that to be a simple case. To me, it seems exceedingly complex. Consider what is involved by your theory. You suppose that your son came down from his bed, went at great risk to your dressing room, opened your bureau, took out the cornet, broke off by main force a small portion of it, went off to some other place, concealed 3 gems out of the 39, with such skill that nobody can find them, and then returned with the other 36 in the room, to which he exposed himself to the greatest danger of being discovered? I ask you now, is such a theory tenable? What other is there? Cried the baker with a despair of gesture. If his motives were innocent, why didn't he not explain them? It is our task to find that out, replied Holmes. So now, if you please, Mr. Holder, we will set off for Streatham together, and devote an hour to glancing a little more closely into the details. My friend insisted upon my accompanying them in their expedition, which I was eager enough to do, for my curiosity and sympathy were deeply stirred by the story to which we had listened. I confess that the guilt of the banker's son appeared to me as obvious as it did to the unhappy father, but I still had such faith in Holmes's judgment that I felt that there must be some grounds for hope as long as he was dissatisfied with the whole accepted explanation. He hardly spoke a word the whole way to the southern suburb, but sat with his chin upon his breast and his hat drawn over his eyes, sunk in the deepest thought. Our client appeared to have taken fresh heart at the little glimpse of hope which had been presented to him, and he even broke into a desultory chat with me over the business affairs. A short railway journey and a shorter walk brought us to Fairbank, the modest residence of the great financier. Fairbank was a good-sized square house of white stone, standing back a little way from the road. A double carriage sweep with snow-clad lawn stretched down in front of 2 large iron gates which closed the entrance. On the right side was a small wooden thicket which led into a narrow path between 2 neat hedges stretching from the road to the kitchen door. And forming the tradesman's entrance. On the left ran a lane which led to the stables, and was not itself within the grounds at all, but being a public, little-used thoroughfare. Holmes left us standing at the door and walked slowly around the house, across the front, down the tradesman's path, and round to the garden behind the stable lane. So long was he that Mr. Holder and I went into the dining-room and waited by the fire until he should return. We were sitting there in silence when the door opened and a young lady came in. She was rather above the middle height, slim, with dark hair and eyes, which seemed the darker against the absolute pallor of her skin. I do not think that I have ever seen such deadly paleness in a woman's face. Her lips, too, were bloodless, but her eyes were flushed with crying. As she swept silently into the room, she impressed me with a greater sense of grief than the banker had done in the morning. And it was the most striking in her that she was evidently the woman of strong character, with immense capacity for self-restraint. Disregarding my presence, she went straight to her uncle and passed her hand over his head with a sweet, womanly caress. "You have given orders that Asha should be liberated, have you not, Dad?" she asked. "No, no, my girl. The matter must be probed to the bottom." "But I'm sure that he is innocent. You know what women's instincts are. I know that he has done no harm, and that you will soon be very sorry you have acted so harshly." "Why is he silent, then, if not innocent?" "Who knows? Perhaps because he is so angry that you should suspect him." "How could I not help suspecting him when I actually saw him with the coronet in his hand?" "Oh, but he had only picked it up to look at it. Oh, do take my word for it that he is innocent. Let the matter drop and say no more. It is so dreadful to think of our dear Arthur in prison." "I shall never let it drop until the gems are found. Never, Mary. Your affection for Arthur blinds you as to the awful consequences to me. Far from hushing the thing up, I have brought the gentleman down from London to inquire more deeply into it." "This gentleman?" she asked, facing round to me. "No, his friend. He wished us to leave him alone. He is around in the stable lane now." "The stable lane?" She raised her dark eyebrows. "What can he hope to find there? Ah, this, I suppose, is he. I trust, sir, that you will succeed in proving what I feel is sure the truth, that my cousin Arthur is innocent of this crime." "I fully share your opinion, and I trust with you that we may prove it," returned Holmes, going back to the mat to knock the snow off of his shoes. "I believe I have the honor of addressing Miss Mary Holder. Might I ask you a question or two?" "Oh, pray do, sir, if I may help clear this horrible affair up." "You heard nothing yourself during the night?" "Nothing until my uncle here began to speak loudly. I heard that, and I came down." "You shut up the windows and doors the night before. Did you fasten all the windows?"
Yes.
"Were they all fastened this morning?"
Yes.
"You have a maid who has a sweetheart. I think that you remarked to your uncle last night that she had been out to see him?"
Yes, she and was the girl who was waiting in the drawing room, and who may have heard Uncle's remarks about the coronet."
"I see. You infer that she may have gone out to tell her sweetheart, and that the two may have planned the robbery?"
But
"But what good is it in all these vague theories?" cried the banker impatiently, "when I have told you that I saw Arthur with the coronet in his hands." "Wait a little, Mr. Holder. We must come back to that. About this girl, Miss Holder. You saw her return to the kitchen door, I presume?"
yes, when I went to see if the door was fastened for the night, I met her slipping in. I saw the man, too, in the gloom."
"Do you know him?"
"Oh, yes, he's the greengrocer who brings round our vegetables. His name is Francis Prosper."
"He stood," said Holmes, "to the left of the door, that is to say, farther up the path than is necessary to reach the door?"
"Yes, he did."
"And he is a man with a wooden leg?" Something like fear sprang up the young lady's expressive black eyes.
"Why, you are like a magician," she said. "How do you know that?"
She smiled, but there was no answering smile with Holmes's thin, eager face. "I should be very glad to go upstairs," he said. "I shall probably wish to go over the outside of the house again. Perhaps I had better take a look at the lower windows before I go up." He walked swiftly around from one to the other, pausing only at the large one which looked into the hall from the stable lane. This he opened and made a very careful examination of the sill with his powerful magnifying lens. "Now we shall go upstairs," he said at last. The banker's dressing room was a plainly furnished little chamber with a large grey carpet, a large bureau, and a long mirror. Holmes went to the bureau first and looked hard at the lock. "Which key was used to open it?" he asked. "That which my son himself indicated, that with the cupboard of the lumber room." "Have you it here?" "That is it on the dressing table." Sherlock Holmes took it up and opened the bureau. "This is a noiseless lock," said he. "It is no wonder that it did not wake you. This case, I presume, contains a coronet. We must have a look at it." He opened the case, and taking out the diadem, he laid it on the table. It was a magnificent specimen of the jeweller's art, and the 36 stones were the finest that I have ever seen. At one side of the coronet was a cracked edge, where a corner holder had 3 gems had been torn away. "Now, Mr. Holder," said Holmes, "here's the corner which corresponds to which has been so unfortunately lost. Might I beg that you will break it off?" The banker recoiled in horror. "I should not dream of trying," said he. "Then I will." Holmes suddenly bent his strength upon it, but without result. "I feel it give a little," he said, "but though I am not exceptionally strong in the fingers, it would take me all my time to break it. An ordinary man could not do it. Now, what do you think would happen if I did break it, Mr. Holder? Would there be a noise like a pistol shot? Do you tell me that this all happened within a few yards of your bed, and that you heard nothing of it?" "I do not know what to think. It is all dark to me." "But perhaps it may grow lighter as we go. What do you think, Miss Holder?"
He had nothing. I confess I share my uncle's perplexity.
"Your son had no shoes or slippers on when you saw him?" "He had nothing on save only his trousers and shirt." "Thank you. We have certainly been favoured with extraordinary luck during this inquiry, and it will be entirely our own fault if we do not succeed in clearing the matter up. With your permission, Mr. Holder, I shall continue my investigations outside." He went alone, at his own request, for he explained that any unnecessary footmarks might make his task more difficult. For an hour or more he was at work, returning at last with his feet heavy with snow, and his features as inscrutable as ever. "I think that I have seen now all that there is to see, Mr. Holder," said he. "I can serve you best by returning to my rooms." "But the gems, Mr. Holmes, where are they?" "I cannot tell." The banker wrung his hands. "I shall never see them again," he cried. "And my son, you give me hopes?" "My opinion is in no way altered." "Then, for God's sake, what is this dark business which has acted in my house last night?" "If you can call upon me at Baker Street Rooms tomorrow morning between 9 and 10, I shall be happy to do what I can to make it clear. I understand that you give me carte blanche to act for you, provided only that I get back the gems, that you may place no limit on the sum I may draw." "I would give you my fortune to give them back." "Very good. I shall look into the matter between this and then. Goodbye. It is just possible that I may have to come over here again before evening." It was obvious to me that my companion's mind was now made up about the case, although his conclusions were more than I could dimly imagine. Several times during our homeward journey I endeavored to sound him upon the point, but he always glided away from some other topic, until at last I gave it over to despair. It was not yet 3 when we found ourselves in our room once more. He hurried to his chamber and was down again in a few minutes dressed as a common loafer. With his collar turned up, his shiny, seedy coat, his red cravat, and his worn boots, he was a perfect sample of class. "I think that I should do," he said, glancing into the glass above the fireplace. "I only wish that you could come with me, Watson, but I fear that it won't do. I may be on the trail of some matter, and I may be following a will-o'-the-wisp, but I shall soon know which it is. I hope that I may be back in a few hours." He cut off a slice of beef from the joint upon the sideboard, sandwiching it between 2 rounds of bread, and thrusting this rude meal in his pocket, he started off on his expedition. I had just finished my tea when he returned, evidently in excellent spirits, swinging an old elastic-sided boot in his hand. He chucked down in the corner and helped himself to a cup of tea. "I only looked in as I passed," said he. "I'm going right on it." "Where to?" "Oh, to the other side of the West End. It may be some time before I get back. Don't wait up for me in case that I should be late." "Oh, how are you getting on?" "Oh, so-so. Nothing to complain of. I've been out in Steetham since I saw you last. But I did not call in the house. It is a very sweet little problem, and I would not have missed it for a good deal. However, I must not sit gossiping here, but must get to these disreputable clothes off and return to my highly respectable self." I could see by his manner that he had stronger reasons for satisfaction than his words alone would imply. His eyes twinkled, and there was even a touch of color upon his shallow cheeks. He hastened upstairs, and a few moments later we heard him slam the hall door, which told me that he was off once more on his congenial bunt. I waited until midnight, but there was no sign of his return, so I retired to my room. It was no uncommon thing for him to be away for days and nights on end, when he was hot upon the scent, so that his lateness caused me no surprise. I do not know what hour he came in, but when I came down to breakfast in the morning, here he was with a cup of coffee in one hand and the paper in the other, as fresh and as trim as possible. "You'll excuse me for beginning without you, Watson," he said, "but you remember that our client was rather audibly early appointment this morning." "Why, it is after 9 now," I answered. "I should not be surprised that he were. I thought that I heard a ring." It was indeed our friend the financier. I was shocked by the change which had come over him, for his face, which was naturally as broad and massive, would now be pinched and fallen in, while his hair seemed to be at least a shade whiter. He entered with a weariness and lethargy which was even more painful than his violence of the morning before, and he dropped heavily onto the armchair which I pushed forward for him. "I do not know what I have done to be so severely tried," he said. "Only 2 days ago I was a happy and prosperous man without a care in the world, and now I am left to a lonely, dishonoured age. One sorrow comes upon the heels of the other. My niece, Mary, has deserted me." "Deserted you?" "Yes. Her bed this morning has not been slept in. Her room was empty, and a note lay for me upon the full table. I had said to her last night, in sorrow, not in anger, that if she married my boy, all might have been well with him. Perhaps it was thoughtless of me to say so. It is to that remark in which she refers in this note." Okay. Thank you.
My dearest uncle, I have brought trouble upon you, and that if I have acted differently, this terrible misfortune might never have occurred. I cannot, with this thought mind, ever again be happy under your roof, and I feel that I must leave you forever. Do not worry about my fortune, for that is provided for, and, above all, do not search for me, for it will be fruitless labor and an ill service to me. In life or in death, I am ever your loving Mary.
What could she mean by this note, Mr. Holmes? Do you think that it points to suicide? No, no, nothing of the kind. It is perhaps her best possible solution. I trust, Mr. Holder, that you are nearing the end of your troubles. So say you have heard something, Sir Holmes. Have you learned something? Where are the gems? You would not think that £1,000 apiece is an excessive sum for them. I would pay 10. That would be unnecessary. 3,000 will cover the matter, and there is a little reward, I fancy. Have you your cheque-book? Here's a pen. Better make it out for £4,000. I would pay 10. That would not be necessary. £3,000 will cover the matter. And there's... With a dazed face, the banker made out the required check. Holmes walked over to his desk, took out a little triangular piece of gold with 3 gems in it, and threw it down upon the table. With a shriek of joy, our client clutched it up. "You have it," he gasped. "I'm saved! I'm saved!" The reaction of joy was as passionate as his grief had been, and he hugged the recovered gems to his bosom. "There is one other thing you owe, Mr. Holder," said Sherlock Holmes rather sternly. "Oh," he caught up a pen. "Name the sum, and I will pay it." "No, the debt is not to me. Your very humble apology to that noble lad, your son, who has carried himself in this matter as I should be proud to see my own son do, should I ever have the chance to have one." "Then it was not Arthur who took them?" "I told you yesterday, and I will repeat today. It was not." "Are you sure of it? Then let us hurry to him at once and let him know that the truth is known." "He knows it already. When I have cleared it all up, I had an interview with him, and finding that he would not tell the story, I told it to him, on which he had to confess that I was right, and to add a little few details, which were not yet quite clear to me. The news of this morning, however, may fast open his lips." "For heaven's sake, tell me, then, what is this extraordinary mystery?" "I will do so, and I will show you the steps by which I reached it. Let me say to you, first, that which it is hardest for me to say, and for you to hear. There has been an understanding between Sir George Burnwell and your niece Mary. They have now fled together." "My Mary? Impossible!" "It is unfortunate more than possible. It is certain. Neither you nor your son knew the true character of this man when you admitted him into your family circle. He is one of the most dangerous men in England, a ruined gambler, an absolutely desperate villain, a man without heart or conscience. Your niece knew nothing of such men. When he breathed his vows to her, as he had done to 100 before, she flattered herself that she alone had touched his heart. The devil knew what was said, but at least became his tool, and in the habit of seeing him nearly every evening." "I cannot and I will not believe it," cried the banker with his ashen face.
I will tell you, then, what occurred in your house last night. Your niece, when you had, as she thought, gone to your room, slipped down and talked to her lover through the window which led to a stable line. His footmarks were pressed right through the snow. So long as he had stood there, she told him of the coronet. His wicked lust for gold kindled the news, and he bent her to his will. I have no doubt that she loved you, but there are women in whom the love of a lover extinguishes all other loves, and I think that she must have been one. She had hardly listened to his instructions when she saw you coming downstairs, on which she closed the window rapidly and told you that one of the servants escapade with his wooden-legged lover, which is all perfectly true. Your boy, Arthur, went to bed after this interview with you, but he slept badly on account of his uneasiness about his club debts. In the middle of the night he heard a soft tread past his door, so he rose, and looking out, was surprised to see his cousin walking very stealthily along the passage until she disappeared into your dressing-room. Petrified with astonishment, the lad slipped on some clothes and waited there in the dark to see what would come of the strange affair. Presently she emerged from the room again, and in the light of the passage lamp saw your son that she carried on the precious coronet in her hands. She passed down the stairs, and he, thrilling with horror, ran along and slipped behind the curtain near your door, whence he could see what passed in the hall beneath. He saw her stealthily open the window, hand out the coronet to someone in the gloom, and then closing it once more hurry back to her room, passing quite close to where he stood behind the curtain. As long as she was in the scene, he could not take any action without horrible exposure to the woman whom he loved. But the instant that she was gone, he realized how crushing a misfortune that would be for you, and how all important it was to set it right. He rushed down, just as he was, in his bare feet, opened the window, sprang out into the snow, and ran down the lane, where he could see the dark figure in the moonlight. Sir George Burnwell tried to get away, but Arthur caught him, and there was a struggle between them, your lad tugging at one side of the cornet, and his opponent at the other. During the scuffle, your son struck Sir George and cut him over the eye. Then something happened, suddenly snapped, and your son, finding that he had the coronet in his hands, rushed back, closed the window, and ascended to your room, and had just observed the coronet had been twisted in the struggle, and was endeavoring to straighten it, when you appeared upon the scene. "Is it possible?" gasped the maker. Then you roused his anger by calling him names at the moment when he felt that he had deserved your warmest thanks. He could not explain the true state of affairs without betraying one who certainly deserved little enough consideration at his hands. He took the more chivalrous route, however, and preserved her secret. "And that was why she shrieked and fainted when she saw the coronets," cried Mr. Holder. "Oh, my God, what a blind fool I have been! And asking him to be allowed to go for 5 minutes. The dear fellow wanted to see if the missing piece was in the scene of the struggle. How cruelly I've misjudged him!" "When I arrived at your house," continued Holmes, "I at once went very carefully around it to observe if there were any traces in the snow which might help me. I knew that none had fallen since the evening before, and also that there had been a strong frost to preserve impressions. I passed along the tradesman route, but found it all trampled down and indistinguishable. Just beyond it, however, at the far side of the kitchen door, a woman had stood and talked with a man, whose round impression on one side showed that he had a wooden leg. I could even tell that they had been disturbed, for the woman had run back swiftly to the door, and was shown in deep toe and high heel marks, while the wooden leg had waited a little and had then gone away. I thought at the time that this might be the maid and her sweetheart, of whom you had already spoken to me, and inquiry showed it was so. I passed round the garden without seeing anything more than random tracks, which I took to be the police. But when I went to the stable lane, a very long, complex story was written in the snow. There was a double line of tracks of a booted man, and a second double line which I saw, which
with delight belonged to a man with naked feet. I was at once convinced, from what your son had told me, the latter was your son. The first had walked both ways, but the other had run swiftly, and as his tread was marked in places of depressions of his boot, it was obvious that he had passed after the other. I followed them up, and found they led to a hall window where the boots had worn all the snow away while waiting. And then I walked to the other end, which 100 yards or more down the lane, where I saw the boots had faced round where the snow was, cut up as though there had been a struggle, and finally there were a few drops of blood had fallen, to show me that I was not mistaken. The boots had run off down the lane, and another little smudge of blood showed that it was he who had been hurt. When he came to the high road at the other end, I found that the pavement had been cleared, and that was the end of that clue. On entering the house, however, I had examined, as you remember, the sill and the framework of the hall window with my lens, and I could not see at once that someone had passed out, but I could distinguish the outline of an instep where the wet foot had been placed on coming in. I was at the beginning to be able to form an opinion of what had occurred. A man had waited outside the window, someone had brought the gems, the deed had been overseen with your son, he pursued the thief, had struggled with him, they each had tugged the coronet, their united strength caused injuries which neither alone could have effected. He had returned the prize, but had left the fragment in the grasp of his opponent. So far I was clear. The question was now, who was the man who had brought it to him, the coronet? It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Now, I knew that it was not you who had brought it down, so there only remained your niece and the maids. But if it were the maids, why should your son allow him to be accused in their place? There could be no possible reason, as he loved his cousin. However, there was an excellent explanation why he should retain her secret, the more so that his secret was a disgraceful one. When I remembered that you had seen her at the window, and how she had fainted at seeing the coronet again, my conjecture became a certainty. And who could it be that was her confederate? A lover, evidently, for who else could outweigh the love of the gratitude she must feel to you? I knew that you went a little out, and that your circle of friends was a very limited one. But among them was Sir George Burnwell. I had heard of him before as being a man of evil reputation among women. It must have been he who tore those boots and retained the missing gems. Even though he knew that Arthur had discovered him, he might still flatter himself that he was safe, for the lad would not say a word without compromising his own family. Well, your own good sense will suggest that the measures I took. I went in the shape of a loafer to Sir George's house, managed to pick up an acquaintance of his valet. I learned that his master had cut his head the night before, and finally, at the expense of 6 shillings, made all sure by buying a pair of his off-cast boots. With these, I journeyed down to Streatham and saw that they exactly fitted the tracks. I saw an ill-dressed vagabond in the lane the other day, said Mr. Holder. Precisely, it was I. I found that I had my man, so that I came home and changed my clothes to so delicate part which I had to play then, for I saw the prosecution was to be avoided to avert scandal, and I knew that so astute a villain would see that our hands were tied in the matter. I went and saw him. At first, of course, he denied everything, but then I gave him every particular that had occurred. He tried to bluster and took down a life-preserver from the wall. I knew my man, however, and I clapped my pistol to his head before he could strike. Then he became a little more reasonable. I told him that we would give him a price for the stones he held, £1,000 apiece.
That brought out the first signs of grief that he had shown. "Why, dash it all," he said. "I've let them go at 600 for 3. I soon managed to get the address from the receiver who had them, on promising him that there would be no prosecution. Off I set to him, and after chaffering, I got our sons at £1,000 apiece. Then I looked upon your son, told him all that was right, and eventually got to my bed about 2 o'clock after what I call a really hard day's work. A day which has saved England from great public scandal," said the banker, rising. "Sir, I cannot find the words to thank you, but you shall find me not ungrateful for what you have done. Your skill has indeed exceeded all that I have heard of. And now I must fly, my dear boy, to apologize to him for all the wrong which I have done. And to what you tell me of poor Mary, it goes to my very heart. Not even your skill can inform me where she is now." "I think that we may safely say," returned Holmes, "that she is wherever Sir George Burnwell is. It is equally certain, too, that wherever her sins are, they will receive a more sufficient punishment."